Welcome, everyone, to her Fireside Stories channel, where we bring you tales of courage, transformation, and sometimes shocking family drama. Today's story will take you on a roller coaster ride from heartbreak to triumph. Believe it or not, by the end of this tale, the very person our heroine once served without question ends up in a place you'd never expect, proving that karma has a way of catching up. How does a once trusting mother transform into a figure of strength who says no to injustice and stands her ground like never before? You'll have to listen to the entire story to find out exactly how it all goes down. So get comfy, grab a warm drink, and make sure you're subscribed to her Fireside Stories channel. That way, you won't miss any of our upcoming captivating stories. And while you're here, feel free to drop a comment with your thoughts and let us know where you're listening from. Ready to dive in? Let's get started. The day my son Callan came barging through my newly painted front door with my ex-husband Leander in tow, I felt the world tilt on its axis, like someone had opened a hidden trap door beneath my feet. I'd spent decades trying to forget the sound of Leander's footsteps on the porch, the weight of his empty promises echoing through our small suburban home. And yet, here he was again, perched in a wheelchair, with a smug half smile, as if expecting me to kneel down and beg him for mercy. It was a few minutes before sunset, the sky outside blazing orange and red. But in that cramped foyer, it felt like winter's chill had seeped into my bones. My heart hammered against my rib cage, not from fear, but from something darker, an anger so deep it felt like it had taken root in my DNA. It had been over 2 decades since Leander last walked out on us, leaving me and our then little boy to scrape by on pennies while he gallivanted off to God knows where. The nerve of him to roll back in on the very day I intended to celebrate my birthday quietly. Just me, a homemade vanilla cake, and a sense of contentment that I thought I'd finally earned after years of heartbreak. I locked eyes with Callan, who had the nerve to announce, "Mom, I know you and Dad have a rough history, but he wants a second chance. Can't we just move on from all that?" As if my battered body and bruised spirit could be swept under the rug so easily. The very notion made my stomach clench. The paint on the walls was still fresh enough that the house smelled like newly cut lumber and sealed plaster. I'd spent my entire retirement savings renovating this two-bedroom for Callan and his new wife, Rosalind. Yet here he was, ordering me to open my arms to the same man who once used them like a punching bag. Anger flashed in my chest, coiling tighter with every word out of my son's mouth. Right then, I realized this was not just about an unwelcome guest. This was about whether I'd let history swallow me whole or finally stand up and claim the life I'd been too afraid to fight for before. Callan's voice rang in my ears, trying to justify the unjustifiable. "Mom, Dad's wheelchair bound, and he can't live on his own. You're retired. You have the time to take care of him." The twisted logic left me breathless, like a blow straight to my gut. The house I'd renovated was a modest one, a testament to my years of sacrifice. After decades of menial jobs, cleaning offices, mending clothes, cooking for wealthy families, I had finally saved enough to invest in something that would belong to me. Ironically, I never imagined my own flesh and blood would seize it out from under me, all in the name of so-called filial duty. I could practically hear the old pipes rattling behind the new drywall, as if the house itself was objecting to this betrayal. Leander leaned forward in his wheelchair, tapping his cane against the floor in a steady, grating rhythm. "You heard the boy. I'm here for good," he said, flashing that same smirk he used to wear when he came home late, reeking of cigarettes and cheap alcohol. I recalled the first time he ever slapped me across the face. We were newlyweds then, naive and full of illusions. He apologized after, swore it would never happen again, but I soon learned that abusers are experts at weaving apologies with repeated offenses. Over the years, I found bruises in places I never knew could bruise, and eventually, I learned to hide them well. But now he was right here, in my home, inviting himself to the bedroom I had prepared for Callan and Rosalind, acting as though decades of absence could be dissolved by a pity story about a broken leg. In the corner, Rosalind stood, her hands twisted together. She looked between me and Callan, visibly torn. I could see in her eyes that she wanted to object, but a sense of loyalty to her husband kept her silent. I pitied her. In some ways, she reminded me of myself when I was younger, a wife unwilling to believe the man she loved could ever be truly cruel. What stung the most was Callan's insistence that the best room should go to his father. "He's older," he said, "and you're used to sleeping anywhere, right?" My nails dug into my palms so hard I felt the skin begin to break, as if decades of living in cramped spaces, working overtime and eating leftovers made me somehow unworthy of basic comfort. I swallowed my outrage, but it refused to sink. If you're here reading and want me to continue, let me know. Comment 1 if you think I should keep pushing forward, or 2 if you feel the tension is too thick already. I'm genuinely curious about your reactions. Where are you watching from? Standing in that hallway, I barely recognized my own son. The wide-eyed boy who used to cling to my apron strings whenever he heard the thunder outside had vanished, replaced by a grown man who spoke to me like I was the intruder. "Mom, you don't understand," Callan kept saying. "Dad was lonely. He reached out to me, apologized, said he wanted to make amends. I thought this was my chance to have a complete family again." There was desperation in his voice, a longing that I could almost empathize with. Almost. Until I remembered the nights I cried alone in my bedroom, the pad of paper where I jotted down every cent of our dwindling finances, the echoes of Leander's fist pounding on the door when he was too drunk to remember which house was ours. And then it hit me. Callan craved a father's love, the kind he never got because Leander vanished when he was too young to remember the bruises on my arms. Maybe in Callan's mind, I was the only obstacle preventing him from reclaiming that elusive sense of family. "You think I still owe that man anything?" I finally snapped, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You think he gets to waltz back in and demand the best bed, the best portion of everything, as if he hasn't been gone for more than 20 years? How dare you, Callan? How dare you?" The weight of my words dropped like a stone in the silence that followed. A flicker of guilt passed over Callan's features, but then he doubled down, muttering something about how he was just trying to do the right thing. Right for whom? Certainly not for me. I stood there, shoulders tense, feeling like the paint fumes were choking the breath from my lungs. One question pounded in my brain. Would I ever escape Leander's shadow? Or was I doomed to relive old nightmares just because my son couldn't fathom a future without a father figure? I dug my heels in like a cornered animal, my voice low and dangerous. "Fine," I said, my anger forging steel in my bones. "You want him in this house? That'll cost you $200,000. The number slammed the air like a judge's gavel. Callan's eyes bulged in shock, as if I'd thrown a gallon of ice water in his face. Rosalind gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Leander let out a choking sound that might have been a laugh or a wheeze. Yes, 200,000 was a lot of money, but so were the decades of labor I put in, the exhaustion that frayed my nerves, and the nights spent awake wondering how to feed Callan. That renovation wasn't a whim. It was my life savings, and I didn't pour it into the house just to watch my ex-husband enjoy its comforts. "Pay me back for the renovation," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "And then you can do whatever you want with this place." Maybe it sounded mercenary, but in that moment, I didn't care. Let them call me cold-hearted. I was done being a doormat. Leander sneered, gripping the arms of his wheelchair like he wanted to jump up and throttle me. "So that's what this is about?" he hissed. Money? You've always been greedy, Marisol. I barked out a laugh, the sound brittle and fierce. Greedy? You emptied our bank account and left me to raise a child with nothing but a stack of bills. You think I'm greedy for wanting compensation for the home I built with my sweat and tears? The memory of that day he left was as raw as if it had happened hours ago. I remembered rummaging through every drawer, searching for spare change, discovering that he had even pawned my grandmother's locket. The betrayal simmered in my veins, fueling my every breath. Callan stared at me, torn between shame and outrage. "Mom, calm down," he said, his voice quavering. "We can talk about this like adults." But I was tired of adult conversations that led nowhere. I was done being the caretaker, the quiet sufferer, the woman who bore every burden without complaint. If I was going to fight, it would be on my terms. Leander tried to shift in his wheelchair, wincing from the pain in his leg. For a split second, I felt a pang of pity. It was in my nature, after all, to worry about others. But then I forced myself to remember that, pitiful or not, this was a man who once believed it was his God-given right to control my every move. He used to read my texts, hover over me in the kitchen, and question every dime I spent on groceries. Now he was older, weaker, but still the same manipulator at heart. "You think the world hasn't moved on without you?" I asked, crossing my arms over my chest. "You think you can roll in and command me like I'm your personal servant? Not anymore." Rosalind stepped forward tentatively. "Maybe we can all cool down," she began, glancing nervously at Callan. "I'm sure we can figure out an arrangement that—" Her words faltered under the weight of the tension. I could see the hesitance in her eyes, the turmoil of wanting to be supportive, yet realizing the full extent of the family drama she'd married into. I wondered if she regretted it yet. She was young, sweet, probably never imagined a scenario this twisted was even possible. Callan ran a hand through his hair, clearly at a loss. "Dad is stuck," he said weakly. "He can't work. He can't even cook for himself. Mom, you always said family is about forgiveness. Can't you find it in your heart to just let him stay?" A memory flashed. A younger Callan, maybe 7 years old, clinging to my waist while tears streamed down his cheeks. He had asked me why Daddy never came to his baseball games. I lied and told him Daddy was busy at work, not wanting him to know the truth, that Leander was off with another woman, draining our joint account to finance God knows what. Now Callan was the grown man, beseeching me to indulge his father. My throat felt tight. "That forgiveness ended the day he walked out," I said, forcing my chin up. "And you can't buy it back with a sob story. He left me once. If I let him in again, he'll just do it in another way." Let me pause here for a moment. If you're still with me, drop a quick comment. Are you on Marisol's side, or do you think she's too harsh? Type 1 if you feel her fury is justified, or 2 if you think there's a middle ground. And let me know what city or town you're reading from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. I hoisted my overnight bag onto my shoulder. Yes, I had an overnight bag packed. I wasn't entirely caught off guard. Deep down, I always suspected Callan might pull something like this one day, though I never expected it to be on my birthday. Maybe there's a part of a mother that always hopes, but also always prepares for the worst. Without another word, I walked to the front door and stepped outside, letting the screen slam behind me. The night air was crisp, and a harsh breeze scraped across my cheeks. I could hear them yelling inside. Leander's voice rose in a mocking tone, calling me names I hadn't heard in years. Callan's deeper timbre tried to reason with him, while Rosalind sounded shaky in the background. I braced myself against the porch railing, inhaling the cold night. Despite the chaos behind me, there was a strange sense of liberation filling my lungs. It was like stepping onto a battlefield where I finally wielded the bigger sword. No more tiptoeing, no more nights of kneading my bruises while Callan slept in the next room, blissfully unaware. I flicked my phone screen on, several missed calls from friends who knew it was my birthday. Ironically, there was nothing from Callan, not even a text. A bitter laugh slipped out. My own son had enough time to orchestrate a grand homecoming for his deadbeat father, but forgot the small courtesy of wishing his mother a happy birthday. Shaking my head, I typed a quick message to an old acquaintance who ran a hair salon across town. "Do you have time tonight?" I asked. "I need a change." I'd never done anything spontaneous like that before, but everything in me demanded a transformation I could control, one small step toward living for myself. I arrived at the salon an hour later, still in my worn-out loafers and a cardigan I'd knitted myself last winter. It felt strange to be there so late, the neon sign flickering in the glass window and casting a pink glow over the reception area. The stylist, a woman with a braided bun and a calm disposition, took one look at my tired face and simply said, "Rough day?" I just nodded, too drained to muster more than that. Sometimes you don't need to explain. Sometimes the exhausted slump of your shoulders says enough. I settled into the chair, the overhead lights reflecting my reflection from 3 different angles. My hair, streaked with gray from years of ignoring it, splayed around my shoulders like a dull, lifeless cloak. "Cut it short," I murmured. "Dye it black, maybe. Just get rid of the old me." The stylist nodded, silent in her efficient movements as she prepared the dye. As she combed through my strands, I felt as though she was brushing away invisible cobwebs of regret and fear, detangling all the messy threads that had bound me to my past. Leander's face floated to my thoughts, his sneer, his contempt. My mind replayed years of living in the shadow of that man, the hush-hush nights where I covered bruises with layers of makeup and lies. "I'm fine, I just fell," I'd say to neighbors who asked why I was limping. In those days, I believed I was doing what was best for Callan, keeping a family together. When it finally fell apart, I should have felt relief, but instead I only felt shame that I hadn't fought back sooner. Now, 20 years later, that shame threatened to choke me again, but I refused to let it. The stylist's voice snapped me back. "You sure about black? It's bold." I forced a smile. "I've never been so sure of anything." And then the dye brush touched my scalp. The cool sensation like stepping into a new chapter I couldn't wait to write. I closed my eyes, letting the background hum of hair dryers and distant chatter wash over me, sealing my decision to shed the old Marisol once and for all. The transformation was striking. When I opened my eyes, I barely recognized myself. The woman in the mirror had sharp, chin-length black hair that framed her face like a warrior's helmet. The stylist gave me a brief nod of approval. "That'll be $50, she said. I handed her the cash and thanked her. Money well spent, I thought, especially compared to the thousands I'd sunk into a house that now felt less like a home and more like a battlefield. As I stepped out into the night, I felt lighter, like the wind might catch my new hair and blow me into a future I'd forgotten how to dream about. Outside, I turned on my phone, half expecting a barrage of angry messages from Callan. Instead, I found just 2 missed calls from an unknown number, no texts. I felt a pang of guilt that he might be searching for me, worried that I was wandering alone at night. Then again, had he felt guilt when he invited a violent stranger? Yes, that's how I saw Leander now. Into my home? Probably not. The old me would have rushed back to smooth things over, to compromise, but this new me felt no such inclination. Let them figure out dinner and housekeeping. Let them wrestle with the tension of trying to cohabitate with a tyrant in a wheelchair. The bus station was nearly empty, a lone fluorescent lamp flickering overhead. I waited for the late-night route that would take me across the bridge to a small motel I knew offered monthly rates for cheap. I had my savings in the bank, still a decent sum even after the renovation. I'd spent it on that house because I believed it was a worthy investment for Callan and Rosalind's future. Now I understood they needed to learn their own lessons in independence. My phone buzzed, a text from an old coworker. Happy birthday, Mari. Hope you're celebrating. I stared at the message, tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. Celebrating? If only she knew. But then again, maybe I was celebrating in a twisted way. Celebrating the fact that I was finally free to decide how this night would end. Feeling the emotional weight of the day pressing down, I hopped onto the bus and found a seat by the window. If you're still reading, let me know how this resonates with you. Comment 1 if you admire Marisol for taking a stand, or 2 if you think she's walking away too quickly. And it might be late, but I'd love to know where you're reading from. How does the night sky look in your part of the world? The hum of the bus engine soothed me as we rattled through deserted streets, past darkened storefronts and lonely gas stations. My mind drifted to the night Callan was born. I remembered huddling in a hospital bed, ignoring the throbbing pain of labor, scanning the door for signs of Leander. He never came, and I went into delivery clutching the hand of a nurse I barely knew. Hours later, Leander showed up reeking of whiskey, swaying as he tried to cradle the tiny newborn. Even then, I lied to myself, hoping fatherhood would mend the cracks in his soul. It didn't. The cracks just grew wider, swallowing more of my spirit along the way. As the bus rolled on, I thought about everything I'd done for Callan, every late-night sewing job, every extra shift washing dishes at the diner so he could have a proper backpack for school. And how did he repay me? By ignoring my birthday and summoning the man who once made my life a living hell. A bitter taste coated my tongue. This anger wasn't just about Leander. It was about Callan, too. About the betrayal of a child who once clung to me for comfort, now casting me aside like an afterthought. We pulled into the motel's parking lot, a scruffy place with a neon vacancy sign that buzzed erratically. The manager, a middle-aged woman in a faded pink tracksuit, eyed me with mild suspicion as I asked for a monthly rate. "We don't usually get the long-term type," she remarked, handing me a form. "Sure you wouldn't prefer something more." "Stable?" I forced a smile. "Stability is overrated," I said, half joking. I left with a key and a receipt, heading to room 102, where the musty curtains and flickering lamp greeted me like a sign of a new start. Strange how freedom can look so bleak, yet feel so exhilarating. Room 1-2 had peeling wallpaper and a bed that groaned every time I shifted my weight. But it also had something I'd been craving for years: solitude. I set my bag down, lit the single overhead bulb, and took stock of my new domain. The bathroom mirror was cracked in one corner, a single plastic chair slumped near a rickety table, and a small TV sat on a dresser. I tossed my phone onto the bed and exhaled, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. What came next was a kind of numbness. I wondered if Callan and Rosalind were bickering with Leander at that very moment, or if they'd found some uneasy truce. I pictured Rosalind diligently making dinner, flinching every time Leander barked out a command. My chest tightened at the memory of how easily he could shift moods. One minute he'd be whining for attention, the next he'd be roaring about how incompetent everyone else was. I'd seen it all before. So maybe Callan was now seeing firsthand that the father figure he'd fantasized about wasn't the hero he'd hoped for. I stared at my reflection in the mirror above the TV, seeing the black hair that now crowned my head. I traced the faint lines on my face, each a testament to battles fought, lost, and half won. In another life, maybe I would have been something else: a teacher, an artist, a traveler. But I was molded by survival, shaped by the need to protect my son from a man who saw us as extensions of his ego. Tears burned at the back of my throat, but I swallowed them down. I was done crying over Leander. Now was the time to start living for me, even if it meant sleeping in a creaky motel room. I found some leftover takeout containers from a previous occupant in the mini fridge, half a hamburger and fries that had gone cold and stale. Wrinkling my nose, I tossed them in the trash. Then, on a whim, I opened a food delivery app on my phone. Maybe I'd treat myself. Pizza, sushi, anything as a belated birthday gift. I scrolled through the options, marveling at how something as simple as a hot meal could feel like a defiant act of self-claiming. The next morning, I woke to the metallic clang of garbage trucks outside my window. Dust motes danced in the pale sunlight, reminding me that no matter how dismal this motel room was, I still had a day to fill with my own choices. I freshened up, changed into a clean blouse, and headed to the lobby for some instant coffee. A part of me wanted to see if there were any missed calls from Callan, but I resisted the urge. He needed time to see Leander for who he really was. And me? I needed time to figure out who I was, separate from being just Callan's mother. After sipping the lukewarm coffee, I scrolled through job listings on my phone. It had been years since I'd worked for someone else. Most of my adult life was spent doing odd gigs and contract work that allowed me to care for Callan while avoiding Leander's explosive outbursts. Now, well into my 50s, I wondered if anyone would even hire me. But money was money, and though I had savings, I wanted a safety net. Oddly enough, a local community center was looking for a part-time art instructor for seniors. They needed someone patient and creative. I wasn't a certified teacher, but I taught myself to paint in my younger days, finding solace in watercolors whenever Leander stormed off. Maybe it was worth a shot. I dialed the number, trying to quell the tremor in my voice as I introduced myself. The coordinator sounded warm, mentioning that they were desperate for someone who could guide gentle craft sessions. "Come by this afternoon," she said. "We'll see if you're a fit." Hanging up, I felt a rush of optimism. Me, teaching art to seniors? It felt surreal, like stepping into a role I'd never dared to imagine. On the way back to my room, I stopped by a thrift store adjacent to the motel. That's where I found a barely used pair of paint-stained overalls and a palette with dried flecks of rainbow colors. Holding them, I felt a spark of hope. If someone else had used these tools to create beauty, maybe I could too, forging my path one brushstroke at a time. Before I continue, I want to check in. Do you see a glimmer of hope for Marisol? Or do you think her troubles are just beginning? Comment 1 if you feel the tide turning in her favor, or 2 if you sense more storms ahead. And seriously, don't hesitate to let me know where you're reading from. I'm grateful you're sticking with this journey. Armed with my thrifted overalls, I headed to the community center, a squat beige building with murals of smiling children and seniors on the exterior walls. Inside, I found a modest art room stacked with construction paper, acrylic paints, and boxes of glitter. The coordinator, a cheerful woman named Harriet, greeted me with a handshake that felt like she was trying to pass on a bit of her enthusiasm. "We're short on volunteers and part-timers," she explained. "Our seniors love painting, but they need a gentle approach." As she handed me a stack of forms to fill out, I caught a glimpse of a small group in the corner, mostly white-haired folks carefully applying watercolors to sheets of thick paper. Their quiet focus reminded me of the same calm I used to seek whenever Leander's chaos raged outside my bedroom door. Harriet introduced me to the group. I told them a bit about my background, omitting the more harrowing details, of course. I mentioned how I once found solace in painting flowers and landscapes, losing myself in each stroke to escape the real world. They nodded with understanding, as if art had saved them, too. Without missing a beat, Harriet invited me to demonstrate a watercolor technique, handing me a brush and a small set of paints. My hands trembled slightly, but as soon as I started outlining gentle petals with watery pinks and greens, a hush fell over the group. In that silence, I found a seed of confidence. We spent the afternoon painting, mixing colors, and joking about who could still see well enough to add fine details. When the session ended, Harriet pulled me aside. "We can't pay much," she admitted, "but we'd love to have you here a few days a week. The seniors already like you." The pay was minimal, but it was more than money. It was a stepping stone toward a life that belonged solely to me. I accepted on the spot, a quiet excitement fluttering in my chest. That evening, I returned to my motel room feeling lighter than I had in years. Teaching art to seniors might seem unremarkable, but to me, it was a declaration of independence, a statement that I was more than just a battered wife or a neglected mother. I was Marisol, a woman who could paint her own future if she dared. The phone rang shortly after I kicked off my shoes. My heart lurched, wondering if it was Callan, but it turned out to be Harriet calling to confirm my schedule. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, equal parts relieved and disappointed. Still, the day's small triumph coaxed a grin onto my face. I decided to celebrate by cooking myself a simple dinner, something I rarely did just for me. I ran to a nearby grocery store and bought fresh vegetables, a small cut of chicken, and some basic spices. Cooking in the motel's cramped kitchenette was a challenge, but the aroma of sautéed onions and garlic soon filled the space, making it feel unexpectedly homey. As I stirred the pot, I recalled how many times I'd cooked elaborate meals for Callan, how I'd quietly endured it when Leander demanded late-night feasts after coming home drunk. Now this meal was mine, made on my terms, for no one's approval but my own. After dinner, I scrolled through my phone. No messages from Callan. No calls either. I swallowed a wave of conflicting emotions, relief that he hadn't tried to guilt me, but also sadness that he hadn't reached out to apologize. Part of me wanted to text him, just to see if he was okay, but pride anchored me. The old Marisol would have bent, bridging the gap. The new Marisol insisted they needed to learn to stand on their own, free from the assumption that I would always be there to mop up the mess. I washed my single plate, set it on a towel to dry, and crawled into the creaky bed. Tomorrow, I would step back into that art room and keep rediscovering the parts of myself that had lain dormant for so long. With any luck, the next day would bring a little more clarity on whether I'd made the right choice in leaving. The next 2 weeks sped by in a haze of watercolor washes, quiet laughter with the seniors, and cautious optimism. Each morning, I'd slip into my thrifted overalls and walk half a mile to the community center, enjoying the crisp air that signaled the start of autumn. My hair, still defiantly black, caught the attention of a few of the seniors. "You remind me of my daughter, always changing her look," one sweet lady remarked. I smiled, wondering how many times I'd suppressed my desire to change my look because it might provoke Leander or confuse Callan. Now I had no such constraints. In those same 2 weeks, not a single call came from Callan, no text, no apology, not even an inquiry about my well-being. Did he think I'd vanish for good? The thought both hurt and emboldened me. Each day that passed without contact felt like an affirmation that I was no longer bound by their expectations. Yet at night in the motel room, I couldn't help but wonder if Callan was struggling under the weight of Leander's demands. Was Rosalind coping? Could it be that they realized the depths of the chaos they'd invited into their newlywed home? One afternoon, just as I was packing up brushes and palettes, Harriet handed me an envelope. "A little thank you bonus," she said. Inside was a small gift card to a local restaurant. "The seniors took up a collection. They appreciate your patience." Tears burned my eyes, but I blinked them away. Acceptance was a powerful thing, especially after years of feeling like I had to beg for scraps of love from my own family. This was unconditional, based on who I was, not on what I could endure. As I walked back to the motel, I felt a surge of gratitude for the simple kindness. The sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in broad strokes of orange and pink. It reminded me of the day Callan had marched Leander into my renovated home. That sky was ablaze with anger and betrayal. This twilight, though, felt calmer, as if letting me know that after every stormy day, some measure of peace would eventually settle. My phone vibrated. I nearly dropped it in surprise when I saw Callan's name flash across the screen. Before I answer that call, let me check. Are you ready to hear what happens next? Give me a quick sign in the comments. 1. If you want to see Marisol pick up that phone. Or 2, if you think she should ignore it entirely. And hey, it's been a while since I asked, where are you tuning in from? Curiosity warred with lingering anger as I stared at the screen. Finally, I pressed accept. Callan's voice crackled through, subdued yet tense. Mom, he said hesitantly, like he wasn't sure if I'd hang up immediately. How are you? I let the silence weigh on him before replying. I'm fine, Callan. Busy. What do you need? A shallow breath. Dad's been difficult, he admitted in a subdued tone. He fired 2 home care aides already. Says they breathe too loud or smell weird. Rosalind and I are at our wits' end. I closed my eyes, conjuring an image of Leander berating some poor caregiver for not meeting his absurd standards. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, my voice flat. But that's your problem, Callan, not mine. He was silent for a moment, perhaps stunned by my refusal to swoop in and fix things. Finally, he muttered, Yeah, I figured you'd say that. Mom, I messed up. I see that now. It's just, I needed a dad, you know? My throat tightened. And I needed a husband who wouldn't beat me, I retorted, my tone sharp enough to draw blood. We don't always get what we need, do we? His voice cracked. I'm sorry, he whispered. Rosalind keeps telling me how you must have felt, how I've been blind to it because I never saw the worst of him. I guess I was just chasing a childhood dream. Something in me softened, but I didn't let it show. Well, that dream isn't worth sacrificing your own peace, I said, or your wife's. If you want to keep him in your house, you deal with it. If you want to send him packing, that's your decision. But I won't be your safety net anymore. He sniffed, maybe on the verge of tears. I understand. I just wanted to hear your voice. My resolve wavered for a second, but I remembered how easy it was for me to slip back into caretaker mode. Callan, I'm done. I really am. Please respect that, I said, and ended the call before my emotions could betray me. After that conversation, I couldn't focus on anything else. My mind roamed back to the nights when Callan was small, how I had shielded him with my very body whenever Leander flew into a rage. Maybe I had overcompensated in his later years, cooking, cleaning, spoiling him because of the guilt I felt that he grew up lacking a present father. But in doing so, had I set him up to believe I'd always pick up the pieces? It seemed likely. Now that cycle was breaking, albeit messily. I spent the weekend ignoring phone calls, throwing myself into a few personal art projects, and exploring the city on foot. With each street I wandered, I recalled a different era of my life, like the grocery store I used to frequent, where I once pawned my wedding ring to afford formula for Callan, or the park where I'd push him on the swing while pretending everything was normal, freed from the daily drudgery of caretaker tasks. These memories came flooding back, not to haunt me, but to remind me how far I'd come. Sunday evening, I treated myself to dinner at the restaurant Harriet's gift card covered, a cozy Italian place with wooden tables and soft guitar music playing overhead. I took a seat by the window, sipping on a glass of red wine as I waited for my lasagna. It was the first time in decades I'd dined alone by choice. My eyes drifted to couples around me, leaning in close, sharing laughter, passing bread baskets. The pang of loneliness was there, but it was tempered by the realization that I'd rather be alone in peace than tethered to someone who would break me again and again. When the lasagna arrived, I savored each cheesy bite, letting the flavors remind me of what it felt like to indulge in life's small pleasures. My phone buzzed halfway through the meal. This time it was Rosalind. A part of me felt a surge of sympathy. She was likely stuck in a pressure cooker, but I couldn't let their panic disrupt my newfound sense of self. Setting my phone face down, I continued eating, ignoring the buzzing until it stopped. If Callan was learning lessons, so was I. And lesson number one was that Marisol's life belonged to Marisol now. Monday came, and with it another art session at the community center. This time, Harriet introduced me to a new group of seniors who wanted to paint landscapes. A wiry old gentleman named Hugo regaled us with tales of his youth hiking across Europe, while a petite woman named Mildred insisted she only wanted to paint lakes because she found them elegant and lonely in the best way. As I demonstrated brush techniques, I felt a rush of contentment that I rarely experienced in my old life. The seniors didn't demand perfection or miracles. They just wanted a gentle guide and a friendly ear, and I was more than happy to oblige. Afterward, Harriet pulled me aside, asking if I'd consider a more permanent role. "Everyone adores you, and you really seem to have a knack for this," she said. My heart fluttered. I'd never been described as adored in my entire life. The pay was still modest, but Harriet hinted that a staff position could open soon. "Think about it," she added, patting my arm. I left with my spirits lifted, hugging a stack of new watercolor paper they'd insisted I take home to practice. Stepping out into the crisp air, I noticed missed calls from Rosalind. The frequency was increasing. Something must be boiling over at home, if I could still call it that. I steeled myself, deciding to pick up just once. Rosalind's voice came through frazzled. "Marisol, I'm so sorry to bother you, but Callan is going through it. Leander's been yelling nonstop, and Callan's stress is off the charts. He's not sleeping, not eating. I'm worried." A shiver ran through me. It sounded like the environment I'd endured for years was now the reality of my adult son, but I kept my tone neutral. "I understand your concern, Rosalind, but you both made a decision. I can't fix it." She stumbled over her words. I know, I thought maybe if you could talk to Leander, he'd calm down." I had to bite back a laugh at the absurdity of the request. "You really think my voice will soothe a man who once considered me his personal punching bag?" The silence on the line spoke volumes. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry. I just didn't know what else to do." I softened slightly. "Rosalind, I do feel for you, but please respect that I'm done being his caretaker." I ended the call with a polite goodbye, feeling a bittersweet mix of vindication and sorrow. How about a quick check-in? Do you think Rosalind's pleas are legitimate or manipulative? Give me a 1 if you think she's just in over her head, or 2 if you sense ulterior motives. And if you're new here, let me know which part of the world you're reading from. There's a certain comfort in knowing these words connect with people far and wide. The days rolled on, marked by the gentle routine of painting sessions, quiet dinners, and the occasional pang of guilt whenever I saw my phone light up with missed calls. My nights were peaceful, if a bit lonely. Yet it was a loneliness of my choosing, a calm solitude that felt so different from the frantic despair I'd known. I began painting in my motel room too, abstract shapes, swirling colors, perhaps an attempt to express the emotional chaos I still harbored inside. One late afternoon, I was hunched over a piece of paper, dabbing at a watery purple swirl, when a text popped up from Callan. "Mom, Dad tried to leave the house on his own. He fell and hurt himself. We had to call an ambulance." My heart clutched. Despite my anger, I didn't wish physical harm on Leander. "He's in the hospital now. Can we talk?" A wave of memories crashed in. Emergency rooms where I once nursed my own wounds. The hush of hospital corridors where staff asked vague questions I was too scared to answer truthfully. I typed back, "I'm busy. I'll call you later." I finished painting before I allowed myself to pick up the phone. When I finally called, Callan sounded haggard. He's got a broken hip. The doctor said it'll be a long recovery. Rosalind is freaking out because she can't manage him alone. I, I can't believe this is my life. I inhaled slowly. Callan, you brought him into it, I replied. If you want out, you know what to do. He sighed heavily. We can't just abandon him. Ah, that same sense of obligation, what once trapped me. Then you either find a care facility or you rearrange your life, I said simply. Those are your choices. He started to protest, but I cut him off. I've done my years as his nurse and punching bag. You're an adult, Callan. Make your own decisions and deal with them. He didn't argue further, just mumbled a faint, all right, and ended the call. Setting down my phone, I realized my hands were shaking, a leftover reaction to years of tension. But I held firm. I was not about to let Leander's drama reel me back in. The hospital stay stretched on for Leander, and with it came a flurry of frantic messages from Rosalind. She sent me photos of the old man looking pitiful in his gown, claiming the hospital staff said he needed around-the-clock help once discharged. I stared at those photos, recalling how he once taunted me in a similarly sterile corridor, back when I was hospitalized for a concussion he caused. The irony was painful. Meanwhile, Harriet noticed my distraction. One afternoon, after the seniors left, she approached me quietly. Everything okay at home? She asked, concern etched across her warm features. I considered lying but decided the truth might feel better. In halting phrases, I recounted a condensed version, an abusive ex-husband returning, my son's misguided attempts at reconciliation, my abrupt escape. Harriet listened without judgment, offering me a hug when I finished. You deserve your peace, she said simply. Keep walking this path you've chosen. You're doing good here. Her words felt like a balm on a raw wound. For so long, I'd fought for Callan's well-being and had no energy left for my own. Now I was discovering how meaningful it could be to nurture my own life. Yet a small voice in my head kept whispering that I was betraying my maternal duties. Guilt was a stubborn companion, still clinging despite every rational argument telling me I was right to leave. That weekend, the center hosted a small art exhibition. Each senior displayed a painting, and Harriet asked if I'd like to include one of my own. Shyly, I selected an abstract piece I'd been working on, a swirl of dark blues and vibrant oranges, capturing the turmoil and unexpected bursts of hope that had defined my recent weeks. During the event, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes lingered near my painting. She eventually approached me. This piece, she said, pointing at the chaotic blend of colors, it feels like a storm that ends in sunlight. I nodded, surprised by her keen observation. That's exactly it, I replied softly. She offered me a small card with her gallery's name on it. If you ever want to sell a piece or do a small show, call me. My heart soared. For once, I saw a door opening that had nothing to do with being someone's wife or mother. All my life, I tried to be a good wife, a decent mother. But after my ex-husband Gary betrayed our marriage, he walked away without ever looking back. It was just me holding everything together. I raised our son Andrew on my own, piece by piece, year by year, the year. Andrew got married. I drained every last penny of my savings to renovate our old house. I just wanted the newlyweds to have a comfortable place to live, something warm and welcoming to start their life together. But never in my wild dreams did I imagine that on my birthday of all days, Andrew would walk into that freshly painted home with Gary, the man who disappeared from our lives over 2 decades ago. Worse yet, Andrew insisted that the master bedroom, the nicest room in the house, should go to his father. He said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. Mom, he told me, like he was the reasonable one here. I know Dad made mistakes, and yeah, you had it rough for a while, but that was ages ago. He wants to come back now to return to our family can't. We just move on. Tears burned my eyes before I could stop them. You think a few words can erase what he did to me, I said, my voice shaking. I can't even tell you how disappointed I am in you, Andrew. He looked stunned, like my reaction somehow came out of nowhere. Why are you still stuck on what happened back then? He shot back. It's really not a big deal anymore. I've already made the decision. Dad's moving in this house. I'd spent months remodeling it, turning it into a modest two-bedroom. The living room's barely big enough for a dining table. I'd planned for Andrew and Tessa to take the sunny master, and I'd stay in the smaller room that was fine with me. I never asked for much, so I asked calmly, if your dad moves in, where exactly do I sleep without missing a beat? Andrew said with him. Of course, that way. It's easier for you to help take care of him. Gary was parked in his wheelchair, tapping his knuckles on the armrest, like he didn't hear a word, half humming some old tune. Eyes barely open, not a single worry on his face, and I just felt cold, a kind of cold that started in my chest and spread like ice water through my veins. Mom, I know this is sudden, Andrew said, eyes down, like that made it better. But I really don't have a choice. Dad broke his leg and he needs someone right now. You're retired. You've got the time. Honestly, having you both under one roof. That used to be my biggest wish as a kid. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, tried not to let it all boil over. Then quietly I said, Andrew, do you even remember what today is? He froze, turned to glare at Tessa like this was somehow her fault. She looked startled, then stepped forward with an apologetic smile. Evelyn, I'm so sorry, I completely forgot. I waved her off and kept my gaze on my son Tessa. It's not on you, I said gently. That was meant for the boy I raised for 32 years. Andrew rolled his eyes, his voice tightening with frustration. Mom, I've been under so much pressure at work lately, I just forgot. Okay, if this had been any other day, I might have let it slide, made excuses for him, felt sorry, but not today. Not while Gary sat there smug and silent. Not when Andrew could remember to bring back the father who abandoned him for over 20 years, but couldn't be bothered to remember my birthday. If you're still reading, you're a trooper. Thank you for sticking around, and let me know what you think of the story so far. Comment 1 if you like it, 2 if you think we could amp up the drama, and I'd love to hear if you recognized how that last section ties into everything. As the days passed, the news from Rosalind and Callan grew more grim. Leander's broken hip required surgery and lengthy rehabilitation. The hospital bills piled up, and the tension in their household was like a ticking bomb. Still, I resisted the urge to swoop in. Every time I felt my resolve waver, I recalled the years of my own suffering, how no one swooped in to rescue me. If Callan wanted to be the savior, he could pay the price. One evening, Harriet and I stayed late at the community center, sorting supplies. She noticed me scrolling through messages on my phone, my forehead creased. You know, she said gently, it's okay to feel torn. Love doesn't just vanish, but you're also allowed to protect your own peace. I nodded, grateful for her understanding. My phone buzzed again, a text from Rosalind. We need to put him in a care facility, but Callan is hesitant. Please help me convince him. A sigh escaped me. Harriet squeezed my hand. Boundaries, she reminded me. Stick to them. In the motel that night, I typed a reply. Rosalind, I support whatever choice ensures your peace and safety, but you won't get my help forcing Callan to see that. He has to arrive at that decision himself. Good luck. The relief of sending that message was immediate. I'd spent a lifetime contorting myself to fit other people's needs. Now I was learning to say no without apology. The next morning, Callan called me, his voice subdued. Mom, I finally understand, he confessed. I see now how Dad's presence tears everything apart. We're moving him to a facility next week. Rosalind found a decent place that takes his insurance. I exhaled, tension uncoiling in my chest. Good, I said simply. Take care of yourselves, Callan. He didn't beg me to come back or scold me for my absence. Instead, he whispered, I'm sorry, and hung up. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it was a start. A heavy weight lifted from my heart, replaced by a cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, my son was learning to stand on his own 2 feet. The facility transfer wasn't smooth. Leander refused to go at first, cursing and throwing tantrums. I heard bits and pieces from Rosalind, who texted updates without expecting a reply. Eventually, he had no choice. Callan's name was on the lease, and the hospital refused to discharge Leander unless there was a clear plan for his care. So, under protest, Leander was wheeled into a specialized nursing center where someone else would have to put up with his temper. It was an ending that felt almost too mundane for a man who once dominated my every waking moment. Strangely, I didn't rejoice. Instead, I felt a deep, calm sadness, like the final exhale after a storm. I pictured him in that facility, raging at the nurses, complaining about the food, while another day marched forward without him in my life. Our past was filled with pain, but for the first time, I recognized that this was the end of an era I survived. Perhaps the best closure was simply not needing to be around to witness his decline. A week later, Callan asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us. I agreed, choosing a small cafe near the community center, neutral territory. He arrived looking older than his years, circles under his eyes, clothes hanging loosely on his frame. The moment he saw me, tears welled up. Mom, he said quietly, his voice raw. I messed everything up, didn't I? I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness anchor me. You made choices, I replied, my tone gentle. And every choice has consequences. But you're alive, you learned. That's what matters now. He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. For a moment, he looked like the child I once consoled with candy and hugs when he scraped his knee. I shouldn't have brought him back, he whispered. I see that now. I was just resentful, I guess. I blamed you for chasing him away, not realizing the damage he'd already done. I reached out, covering his hand with mine. It's over, I said softly. All we can do is move forward. We talked for an hour about Rosalind, about how they planned to rebuild their marriage. He apologized more than once, and though I didn't give him complete absolution, I offered something better. The promise that I still loved him, but on terms that honored my own worth. As for Rosalind, she sent me a message a few days later, thanking me for not despising her when she sided with Callan. She explained how she'd grown up in a stable family, how the idea of reuniting father and son seemed noble. Only after living with Leander did she comprehend the magnitude of what I'd endured. I replied, telling her that I held no grudge, that we all learned through trials, and she'd faced a hard one. The relief in her reply was palpable even through text. Meanwhile, life at the community center became even more fulfilling. Harriet officially offered me a part-time position and with a small bump in pay. The seniors made me feel like part of a big, unconventional family. No drama, no hidden strings. Some days, I even forgot about the motel room I returned to at night. The cracks in the bathroom mirror no longer bothered me. They reminded me that no one is flawless, and that a few cracks don't mean you're incapable of reflecting light. One weekend, I mustered the courage to visit an actual art gallery to see if I could display some of my work. It was a modest space, the walls lined with paintings from local artists. I clutched 3 of my own pieces, heart hammering in my chest. The curator, a sharp-eyed woman in a flowy scarf, studied my paintings carefully. After a long pause, she said, "They're raw and emotional. I like that. We can display them in our upcoming community showcase." I almost wept with gratitude right there. For so long, I believed my life story was one of survival, not of creation. Now I realized they could coexist. That night, after returning to my motel room, I watched the moonlight filter through the tattered curtains. I wondered if I was ready to find a more permanent home, maybe an apartment near the art center. The idea felt tantalizing, a sign of stability not tied to Callan or Leander. Maybe I'd adopt a cat, fill my walls with paintings, and finally live as a person with her own identity. It was a gentle, hopeful dream, one I was ready to chase. Isn't it inspiring to see Marisol blossom? If you're as touched by her journey as I am writing it, drop a 1 in the comments. Or if you think she still has a lot to overcome, drop a 2. And tell me, what part of her transformation resonates with you the most? In the following weeks, I took small but meaningful steps toward that new life. I applied for a lease on a tiny studio apartment near the community center. The landlord, a gruff old man, grilled me about my employment history. Normally, I'd feel anxious, but I stood my ground, explaining I was now an art instructor and had steady, if modest, income. He gave me a once-over, then muttered something about creative types before handing me a key. The place was far from perfect, old carpets and a faint scent of mildew, but I saw potential. That same week, Harriet encouraged me to lead a special workshop, Healing Through Art. It aimed to help trauma survivors express their experiences through painting. My throat constricted when she mentioned it, but I accepted. If there was one thing I knew, it was trauma. The first session arrived, and a small group of people, some older, some younger, shuffled in, eyes downcast. We started with simple colors on paper. Paint your current emotion, I instructed, demonstrating by swirling a mix of blues and yellows for a kind of hopeful sadness. As the group worked, tears flowed, confessions surfaced. It was both heartbreaking and cathartic. After the workshop, a middle-aged woman lingered behind. She showed me her painting, jagged black lines slashed across a fiery red background. "I'm not sure what it means," she said, voice shaking, "but I think I needed to paint it." I nodded, fighting tears of my own. Art can reveal truths we can't put into words. She squeezed my hand, gratitude shining in her eyes. In that moment, I understood that my story, painful as it was, could light the way for others who felt trapped in their own darkness. When I returned to the motel that night, I quietly packed my belongings. Tomorrow, I'd move into my new studio. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I gazed around the room that had been my refuge and prison for the last month or so. I felt no sadness leaving it, only the thrill of stepping into a life I never believed I deserved before. Moving day was modest. Just me, 2 suitcases, a bag of painting supplies, and a heart brimming with cautious optimism. The studio's walls were a dreary beige, but I already had plans to cover them with my own paintings. I wanted the space to reflect who I was becoming. A woman unafraid to claim her own happiness, even if it came in small brush strokes. I spent the day scrubbing floors, wiping windows, and humming softly to myself. The echo in the empty space felt full of promise rather than loneliness. Late in the afternoon, Callan and Rosalind showed up with a small housewarming gift, an electric kettle and a box of herbal teas. They looked tentative, as if unsure of their welcome. I accepted the gift with a smile. "Thank you," I said, placing it carefully on the counter. We spoke in hushed tones, acknowledging the hurt, but also the growth that had transpired. "Dad settled into the facility," Rosalind offered, eyes flicking to me as if gauging my reaction. I nodded. "It's for the best." No resentment, no anger, just quiet acceptance. Standing there, the three of us shared an unspoken understanding that things would never be as they were, and that was okay. We were forging something new, built on clarity and mutual respect instead of illusions. They stayed for a short while, helping me hang a few paintings on the walls. Before leaving, Callan hugged me. "I love you, Mom," he said, his voice trembling. For the first time in a long time, I believed him. That night after they left, I brewed myself a cup of chamomile tea and stepped onto the tiny balcony that overlooked a dilapidated courtyard. In the distance, city lights shimmered, and a gentle breeze carried the promise of change. My phone buzzed, a text from Harriet confirming the next Healing Through Art session. I smiled. The new me was an artist, a teacher, a survivor, and yes, still a mother. But motherhood no longer defined my entire existence. I raised the teacup in a silent toast to the moonlit sky, a final goodbye to the woman who once cowered under Leander's cruelty. No more cowering. This was my life, and I was ready to live it on my own terms, one bold, vibrant stroke at a time. Thank you so much for tuning in to her Fireside Stories channel. We hope this dramatic journey of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate self-discovery has resonated with you in some way. Our main character's decision to break free and regain control of her life reminds us that it's never too late to stand up for ourselves. And while one chapter closes for her, a new empowering one begins, a testament that our past does not define us, but our actions moving forward certainly do. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay connected and catch our future tales of heartache and heroism. We'd also love to hear your personal takeaways, so drop a comment below. Did you see that twist coming? How would you have handled such a situation? And let us know where you were listening from. It's always amazing to see how our community spans the globe. Until next time, stay strong, stay inspired, and keep the fireside glow alive.